Well, welcome back, everybody, to the Tech Whispers podcast. I'm Dan Roberts, your host. And for this week's episode, we're doing something really, really special. In honor of Veterans Day and as a tribute to our veterans, I've invited three amazing guests. All are powerhouse CIOs today, but also all are military veterans. They cut their teeth early in their careers in the military, and so learned a lot about leadership from that vantage point. Mike Goodwin is the CIO for PetSmart. Many of us know Mike. He's also on the board of directors for Burlington Stores. Mike is a West Point graduate. He was an Army officer and is someone who always inspires and challenges me in great ways, and really appreciate him being here today. DiAnna Thimjon is a four-time CIO who now advises and mentors CXOs across different industries. In her spare time, she also owns two businesses, with her second one being Hammerhand Coffee, which is based in Liberty, Missouri. So when you're in the Kansas City area, go visit Hammerhand and show a little love to DiAnna, her company. DiAnna also graduated from West Point, like Mike, and served as an Army military intelligence officer. And I'll mention that her son is currently enrolled in West Point, so certainly a chip off the old block. Last but not least, we have Woody Groton, the CIO of Cambridge, Massachusetts-based Draper, and also a brigade commander for the Army National Guard. Woody has served in the Army for over 25 years on active duty and also in the reserve components. His wife just returned from deployment. They have 6 people in his family who are active in the Army today. His wife just got back from Poland, having served there. His son is still on deployment, and just proving once again that the fruit does not fall far from the tree. So we wish his son well, and welcome to the three of you. I'm so glad that you're here today. DiAnna, let's jump into it. I want to start with you. And, like you all, our audience loves data. They love the data, right? So I want to start with some interesting data around leadership and leadership development. And this is mind-boggling. The friends over at Zenger Folkman tell me that the average age of a first-time leader, this is in the civilian world, is 27 years old. Multi-year study, okay? So this is a long time study. The second data point was the first formal leadership development that people get is age 46. What could go wrong in those 19 years in between, DiAnna? So talk about that. You're shaking your head, which that's what I did too. Compare that to your experience in the military.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. I think it's a great question because when you're in the military, you don't actually appreciate what's happening, which is that leadership starts from day one. And you think about just tactically in terms of progression, you've got privates who want to be private first classes, you have private first classes who want to be specialists, and so on. There's this idea of growth is important, progression is important. And so early on, the idea that everybody has an opportunity to lead starts with that private. It started with me when I was at West Point. I was a plebe, a freshman. My second year there, I suddenly have a person I'm accountable for, responsible for. And my third year there, I had a squad, and then I had a platoon and a company and so forth. And that continued in the military, where there's always this sort of informal opportunities to lead people. And the idea that leadership development sort of never ends. When I transitioned into the civilian world, I was sort of looking around for that mentor model, and it really wasn't there. It really wasn't. And suddenly I would see peers of mine be thrust into management positions, and they might be 28, 29 years old and have never had any sort of training or teaching. And meanwhile, for me, I'd had 10 years of progressive kind of leadership experience. So I think, there's something there that the military does that I wish we could do better in the civilian world, which is really the idea that, one, progression matters. So let's make sure everybody kind of continues to see it. Doesn't always mean promotion. It can be more accountability and responsibility. The other is that there's a great deal of learning and development that you can do just from peer leadership and, kind of small team leadership. And that the idea that you could continuously have a mentor should be something that is expected in the civilian world. For me, I had to seek it out. Mike was one of my mentors. And all of us probably had to seek people out to teach and train us. But certainly in the military, that's just what they do sort of naturally.
Yeah, really rich insights. And it's interesting you mentioned coming into the civilian world and looking for that mentor framework or infrastructure. And, we have a leadership program. We have hundreds of people around the world in it concurrently. And I would say 80 to 90% of these middle managers in IT have never had a mentor. Like, we set them up with a mentor. It's a brand new experience. And, you're all thinking, wow, how does that happen? Right. So interesting points you made. Mike, one of the things I like to do in the podcast is I like to reach out to folks in our audience and have them provide questions. So I've got 5 amazing questions, all CXOs and all in the civilian workforce, but all coming from the military as well. So let's listen in, and I'll have you take this first one.
Hi, my name is Susan Courtney, and I am currently the Executive Vice President at Blue Cross Blue Shield of Nebraska, in charge of operations and clinical effectiveness. I was in the U.S. Navy for 6 years, and when I was in the Navy, I flew on a Boeing 707 aircraft as part of Fleet Air Reconnaissance Squadron 4 as a navigator, airborne communications officer, and a mission commander. And the question I have for the panelists today, could you tell me what were 1 or 2 of the most valuable leadership lessons or experiences that you had when you were in the military that prepared you for civilian leadership?
Now, we're not going to do any of the Army Navy jokes, right, Mike? We're going to just...
No, we're all good here. Well, first of all, I'd like to say thanks again for allowing me to be on the panel here, both with Woody and DiAnna. And also thanks to Susan for the question, and more importantly, thanks for her service also. One of the things that I would say that I learned in the military that I've translated into the corporate world was really 3 things. One was the importance of clarity of context, clarity of mission, and clarity of the collective, how you fit into that. And the reason, and you're going to see 3 things, it's going to be a theme with me here as we go forward here. I probably may talk about that a little bit later. But the reason why I think those 3 things are important is typically you can plan every outcome, or you can even plan the mission. And the chances that it's going to go 100% as planned, it's not always there. And so things are going to go awry, things are going to change. So I think it's really important, especially as I learned in the military, to understand, what's the context of why we're doing this? Why is this mission important? What's the goal there? The other thing is clarity of what actually is the mission itself. What is it we're trying to accomplish? And a third thing is, how do you fit into the total picture of things? What's the context or the collective mission that we're part of? And by having that pushed down into the organization and creating constructs to do that, which the military did very well in terms of how we had our op orders and how we pushed those down across the different units. So when things do go awry, it gives us the opportunity for those units to adjust in the situation. There's no way a commander or a leader can micromanage in real time when things go wrong. They're going to have to really rely on those folks on the ground to make those decisions, make those adjustments. And I think you're seeing that actually play out in Ukraine. If you're following what's happening that's over there, you've actually got the generals literally at the front line trying to lead and make those real-time decisions. And so the Ukrainians figured it out. So, okay, well, let's just pick off the generals. And when that happened, you saw a lot of chaos occur because those 3 things weren't in place. So I think that definitely translates into the corporate world also, is where if you can have that same clarity across the context, the mission, as well as the collective role that you play, you're empowering those leaders to make those adjustments for those business outcomes you're trying to achieve. At the same time, you're not going to be in every meeting and every project review. You don't have to really rely on those folks understanding all those pieces to make those adjustments. So that was really ingrained in me personally, and there were constructs in the Army when I did that across all the services. And I think that's something that definitely translated well in corporate world that I use to this day.
So good. Yeah. So context, clarity, collective mission, power of 3s. And we will come back to that, Mike. It's one of the secret sauce of great communication. And thank you, Susan Courtney, good friend. And I promise you, I'm coming back to Omaha so we can break bread again. So look forward to that. Woody, we've got another great question from a good friend of mine, Robert Sheasley. So I'd love to have you listen and then respond to his question.
Hello, this is Robert Sheasley, Chief Information Officer with Wrench Group. Served in the Marine Corps from 1987 to 1991, 4 years. And my question is grounded and anchored in one of the leadership principles of General Colin Powell. Leadership is solving problems. The day soldiers stop bringing you their problems is the day you have stopped leading them. My question is related to this quote, this leadership principle, can you provide an example of when a soldier or subordinate has brought a significant problem to you and you assisted or helped guide them in solving that problem and what the outcome was?
Great question, Woody.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thanks for, again, the opportunity to be here and to really highlight Veterans Day and what that means. And Colin Powell is one of my favorite leaders. I was in Desert Storm, so he was the chairman of the Joint Chiefs then. And I frequently, look at his 13 rules for leadership. So something that happened pretty recently. So we have a cyber unit in the New Hampshire National Guard that's in my brigade. And the commander was very stressed. Our adjutant general is very aggressive and doing a lot of missions for our state partnership program. And the state partnership program is where the National Guard works with emerging nations to provide subject matter expertise. So we have 4 cyber engagements scheduled for this year, and the first one is starting very quickly. And this particular captain was very concerned because he wasn't used to having support and thought that he had to do all of the logistics himself. And I said, absolutely not. I have a brigade staff that's very talented. They will take care of all the logistical issues, details, the pay, the travel, all of that. And then all you need to do is get the soldiers who are going to go on that mission and to have, focus on the cyber subject matter expertise that you're providing. I can't solve a problem that I don't know about. So I think it's important as leaders that we encourage our subordinates, to bring their problems to us. And, another part to that is, a lot of times they kind of already might have an idea of what they need, what they want to do. So with one of the first things I'll ask, well, what's your recommendation? Because 9 times out of 10, they already know what they want. They're just looking for confirmation that what they're doing is right, that I've got their back, and I'm going to give them the resources. And then finally, we have to allow people to make honest mistakes. And that's going to happen over time too. Make honest mistakes, learn from, but as I say, integrity is absolute.
Yeah, fantastic. And Robert, really appreciate that question, and wish I had time to share one of my most memorable days as a professional the last 3 decades was with Robert and some special operations folks. So I'll share it later if we've got time. But DiAnna, before we jump into the next question from the audience, I'd be interested in your response to Mike Tyson's famous quote, right? I think it kind of relates on many levels here, but he would say, everybody has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. Does that resonate with your mindset around planning?
It does. I've heard a different version, all good plans fall away at the first bullet. That's a little bit more specific and tactical, but Mike Goodwin mentioned it, which is that, really most plans are aspirational. They're not realistic. And, there are these wonderful and terrible intersections where you face up against a different person or a different collection of people who have a very different mindset, and suddenly you've got to react. And I think early in my career, I thought there was a perfect plan. I thought I could build a perfect plan, and I would seek out every opportunity to make that plan as perfect as possible. And, what I learned was a second quote, Dan, that I actually think is wonderful, which is a good plan well executed far outweighs a perfect plan never or poorly executed. The idea that, let's shape a good plan, and then let's, realize our reactions matter more than anything else. In the civilian world, when I, started leading in the civilian world, I realized that because of my inexperience in civilian settings, there were oftentimes things I couldn't predict because I hadn't had that experience yet. And in IT in particular, every day there's something new that we get introduced that we're supposed to implement perfectly. And we might do it one time in our entire career. So I really lean on that idea that let's build a really good plan, and then let's really, to put it in a one-way war game, triage what could happen. Let's think through those reactions. Let's build in contingency. The other piece, and then I'll stop, is that, plans are only as good as the leaders who are in place to kind of help direct and guide them. And, Mike was talking about those generals up front sort of leading and directing on the Russian, and that didn't work. The reality, though, is you have to have leaders at those intersections along the way where they can react, they can think through, they can pull an asset forward, like Woody said, bring somebody who's got a good idea forward, bring some creativity and solve it. So I think, Dan, if we can do nothing as leaders, it's to really help the next generation realize, there are no perfect plans, there are only good plans. And what you have to try to be is really a leader brave enough and courageous enough to say, I don't actually have all the answers. So let's work on how we're going to react. Let's build in some ways that we can manage contingency and make sure the outcomes still get to what we need to.
I appreciate the three of you in terms of your servant leadership approaches and philosophies and your humility. So it really is consistent with that. And yeah, I appreciate that. And, there's another great guest question from Dan Bruno.
My name is Dan Bruno, and I'm the Chief Operating Officer of Duke Health Technology Solutions, providing technology support and solutions to Duke University Health System. I retired from the United States Army as a colonel after 30 years of service. My last assignment in the Army, I was the garrison commander of West Point in the United States Military Academy. Dan and panel, on behalf of veterans, I am grateful for this tribute today. We often hear, and I have experienced firsthand at Duke, our veterans have a unique experience base from their service. Characteristics like adaptability, resilience, and the ability to more easily pivot. During these past 3 turbulent years, have you noticed this amongst the veterans you employ? Thank you.
So Woody, maybe you can take the first part of that question.
Yeah, I mean, the military mindset is one of, don't fail. No matter what, even if we're limited soldiers, resources, et cetera, that we have to accomplish the mission. But you have to balance that to avoid burnout. I previously mentioned I'm a brigade commander of the New Hampshire Army National Guard, and during the response to the COVID-19 pandemic, the Guard executed unprecedented missions, testing, later vaccine sites. We ran PPE warehouses. We supported the prisons, all of that. So IT is very similar in the last several years because we had to practically overnight transform to support, work from home, remote workforce. And getting tongue tired here a little bit. So at Draper, we have a large number of currently serving Guard and reservists, and their ability to kind of roll with the punches and to, in stressful situations, when some type of upgrade or some type of update doesn't go right, to be able to deal with that. I think that's another that part of that resiliency and that adaptability. And I think as IT leaders, we all need to be able to, lead change very quickly when something like the pandemic came into place. And I think that IT across, the world really did a great job with that. And I think it really highlighted, the value of IT, the value of the CIO and the IT staff, and having veterans among that staff certainly bring all of those military attributes. And I think they help, and that their outlook, their adaptability, it certainly sets a good example for their fellow coworkers.
Yeah, well said. And Mike, maybe you could take the second part of Dan's question. And certainly the last 2-3 years have been pretty unprecedented in terms of the stress and strain on our people, our leaders. And have you seen a difference in how your veterans show up?
First of all, I would say is that I don't want to suggest that it's only veterans that are able to be cool and calm under fire and drought, because I've seen a lot of great leaders. But what I will say is that veterans do have the opportunity to be exposed to that probably more frequently than the average greater population. And they're typically in a lot of life or death situations, especially when in conflict and in the major battles that are occurring right now, unfortunately. So, COVID definitely was an unprecedented time. I know that's a word that's overused, but it definitely was unprecedented. When you think about it, it was a global crisis also. I mean, there was no playbook on how to do this. There were fears and anxiety across all levels of the organization. And if you kind of draw back to the veterans, what they go through when they draw upon those experience in life or death situations, I do think it translates where veterans in general definitely have the opportunity to try to balance the emotional aspects of what's going on, because things kind of get heated, things go wrong. Like I mentioned earlier, Woody mentioned earlier also in terms of his experiences too, is that first thing is you got to get the unit focused and really keep them calm and get back to the mission. And that's something that's practiced over and over and over again in the military. And translate that into the civilian world, if you have that kind of innate behavior that's ingrained into you, it becomes more of a natural instinct to where, okay, let's focus, let's get things calm, Let's get things to a point where we can think and still accomplish the outcomes we're trying to achieve that's there. And so I think that's important where you're balancing that aspect of it, of getting the situation under control to getting back to the mission that's at hand so you can accomplish the outcomes you're trying to do. And then understanding how that's going to continue to flux throughout the entire life cycle. I mean, there's the beginning of COVID, there's COVID, and then there's post-COVID. And each of those are different stages that organizations had to go through. Same thing in the military. As you mentioned, you have the different phases of the mission also. So it's not surprising to hear Dan's experience about how veterans tend to excel. I'm not saying they're the only ones, but a lot of that's because of the training and really the nature of the situation, the mission, and then how to adjust as you go into that. And I think that gives veterans that should be sought out that give that advantage in terms of leadership.
Yeah, I love that perspective. And thank you, Dan Bruno. I learn something new every time I talk to Dan. I learn. I just always appreciate him. Woody, Mike mentioned the term context earlier. In your office in Cambridge, Mass, is a whiteboard. Do you mind sharing what's on that what phrases on that whiteboard?
Yeah, in fact, I had it in my notes for the next answer, but in the upper right corner, it says, "Remember, we're not getting shot at." So I think that says a lot about stress and it puts things into perspective. And my staff, it's really resonated with them, and they'll bring it up in meetings and everything. I also have Colin Powell, perpetual optimism is a force multiplier on there. And then the other one I have is perception is reality. So those are just some of the kind of little nuggets. But, the whole thing about, hey, we're not getting shot at, it's going to be okay. It'll all be here tomorrow.
That's good perspective. And I want to pull in a question from John Hill, incredible CXO. John's got some two questions I want to kind of pull in. And Woody, I'd like to have you take this first question, maybe double click on some of those great Woodyisms you just shared. So let's listen in for John's question.
My name is John Hill. I'm the Chief Digital Information Officer for MSC Industrial Supply. Amongst my experience, I started in the military after having graduated from the Air Force Academy. So my first 5 years of my professional life was as a military officer. And my question for the panel is, what is it about the military experience that makes veterans ideal candidates for a career in technology leadership?
Love that.
Yeah, I mean, the answer is in his question, leadership. It's the last thing he said. Not just management, but leadership under fire. Say obviously in IT we're not in danger, but it can get really stressful. We have incidents or planned upgrades that don't go as planned. As a young platoon leader, I personally led 30 soldiers in combat, and that gets back to having responsibility early. I was only 25 years old, but I was given this great responsibility for not only completing the mission, but doing my best to ensure that all my soldiers made it home. And I mentioned, written on my wall, "Hey, we're not getting shot at." And I've been shot at, and it's highly overrated, but but it does put things in perspective, and it's helped me to remain calm as an IT leader. I think the other thing is that adaptability and how an IT technology changes so quickly. And we have to deal with change every day and be adaptable. And I think that happens a lot in the military as well. As new technology comes in or you're getting transferred, you have new leaders come and go every year or two. I just think that military experience certainly lends someone well to a technology career. And I also just I keep getting tongue-tied here, but just that we have a technical background, but we also have the leadership experience that the military brings. So it's both sides of that equation.
Yeah, great question, John. I appreciate those perspectives, Woody. And DiAnna, he had another question I'm going to just kind of share with you and have you talk to it. But he talked about kind of like double click. What is it about the military experience that enables veterans to react to emerging situations or to trying projects and are able to jump in and fix those, right? They're able to, they tackle things that others might not tackle. How'd you go about building those muscles and mindset yourself, DiAnna?
Yeah. I think Mike talked a little bit about it. Woody did as well. After I graduated the academy, I spent 5 years in the Army, and I did 5 jobs in that 5 years. I was an XO running a motor pool and a team of, supply specialists. I was a senior intelligence officer where I had interrogators and signals intelligence folks work for me, which sounds a lot cooler than it actually is. It's just a lot of hard work. I could go on, but my experience was not dissimilar to a lot of folks in the military. You move every couple of years, you're thrust into a new unit, you're with new leaders all the time, platoon leaders are changing out. So some of that, Dan, is about the mindset to bloom where you're planted and to really get a foundation of skills that really work in any situation. And when I transitioned into the civilian world, I really couldn't do anything but tackle, problems to solve and try to simplify it into terms that I understood, which was, hey, we've got a set of skills. Let's take those set of skills regardless of the problem. Now, my experience was teams were unused to that. They were taught failure was something you avoided, so you did the same thing you'd always done in exactly the same way. You didn't put your head out and raise your hand. And that was culturally a lot of the teams that I, ended up kind of being a part of and ultimately getting to lead. And so I had to very quickly sort of create that, hey, we're gonna build a foundation of skills. We're going to rely on confidence that each of you are leaders. And we're going to agree that most situations have roughly the same parameters. They just show up a little bit differently. And then more important than anything as a leader, we're going to let you fail. We're going to agree that iteration is king. And we're going to do something wrong a couple of times and we're going to learn from it. We're going to build processes and then we're going to do that right the next time. And I think that, Dan, is really, to me, what I learned from folks who gave me those same sort of mentor, kind of safe place, if you will, to succeed. And I've tried to do that the same with my teams.
For all of our audience who is aspiring to go into leadership or as you're moving up the ladder, just so many nuggets, already so far. And this notion of bloom where you're planted, right? That's, I think sometimes we get a little bit whiny, right? It's like, I don't want to be here, but there's someone who put you there for a reason, right? And just maybe trust and give it the 110%. And I can't tell you how many leaders over the years have talked about being a blind spot, not realizing until much later how that was a gift. And so, yeah, great teaching there, DiAnna. Thank you, John Hill, who, by the way, just completed his PhD. Amazing and incredibly interesting dissertation he did, doctoral dissertation. You all have these big jobs and you still find time to do this stuff on the side. I don't know how you do it, but another great question, Mike. I'll have you take this one from JC Glick, one of my true heroes. So let's listen into JC's question.
Hey, my name's JC Glick. I was fortunate enough to do 20 years in the military, did 11 combat tours, spent most of my time with the 75th Ranger Regiment or in the asymmetric warfare group. Since then, I've been fortunate enough to be a leadership consultant, an advisor, and work with sports teams and corporations on improving culture and leadership at scale. My question is, would most CIOs rather they hire someone who is tech savvy and understands the technical components and are experts at their technical field, or would they rather hire someone who could be taught that stuff, but would be really good at leadership and moving up the chain and maybe was less comfortable with the technical aspects or not as skilled at the technical aspects, but would learn it, but were better leaders?
Awesome. Mike, I'll let you take that one.
Sure. JC, thanks for the question and thanks for your esteemed career and service you had. I'm sure Woody appreciates you. I see Woody's wearing his Ranger tab, so there's an affiliation there also. I think that's a great question. What I could tell you from my personal experience, and even when I went into the Army, my first job in the Army was a second lieutenant as a FIS leader. And when I joined, even though I had gone through all the training in school, everyone there in that unit knew more than I did day one when I started. And so there was no illusion that I had that I would come in and be able to lead them on all technical aspects of it. So I had to learn, and I had to learn from them. And a lot of questions I get, from those that know that I was in the military, say, wow, you were in the military, you're an officer. It was probably easy to lead. You just give them a lawful order to do what you needed to do. And nothing could be further from the truth. I mean, yeah, if I gave a lawful order, they would have to follow the bare minimum to get that lawful order completed. but it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get the maximum potential out of the organization or the individuals. And so really it comes down to leadership, building respect the individual and not necessarily respecting the rank. And so my entire time in the military, I went into jobs where I had to learn, and I was a learner, so I had to learn in agility, but I wasn't going in there to be the technical expert. It really was, what did I needed to do to lead this organization so they can accomplish the mission? I needed to know enough to be able to give guidance, to be able to ask the right questions. But the more important thing was I need to rely on my leadership skills to help motivate them, to help them understand the mission, the importance of it, and why we're trying to accomplish that. And that's what I carried also into the corporate world. My first management job in a corporate world, I had the most technical group that was put together as a result of a reorg. And so it was a group of very, very, very smart folks. Every one of them a lot smarter than I was. So my intent was not necessarily to do that. And so I've always used this as kind of a guidepost for my career as I continue to grow, is that be technical savviness, willing to learn, ask the right questions, know what right questions to ask. And as you move further and further up in the organization, leadership becomes more and more part of it. It's less about studying the technical aspects of the job. It's really more about being a student of leadership and how you create and galvanize the organization to achieve those accomplishments. So that's something that the Army taught me early. They have frameworks, they have constructs to be able to do that I was able to apply and take with me when I went into the corporate world. And I use that to this day. I am not afraid to hire people that are smarter than me. In fact, I have to do that to fill in the gaps. And not necessarily just on the technical side of things, but sometimes on some of the leadership things. If there's a leadership blind spot that I have, then how can I supplement that to make sure I have that point of view on my team? So I think as you progress in the organization, you're always going to be in an uncomfortable situation. We're not going to have all the answers, but you have to have the right organization, right people around you that can get to that point and accomplish the outcomes.
So good. And, JC, like you all, has parlayed his military experience into an amazing civilian career. I can't name names, but the corporate executives, the professional coaches, especially NFL, even some players that he coaches and advises is like the who's list. So great job. And thank you, JC. Mike, you and I have talked a lot over the years about how great leaders are great communicators, right? And we're not known for that in our profession. In fact, we have a lot of assessment data around that. It's one of the Achilles still today. You mentioned earlier about communicating in threes, the power of threes, and there's something to it. Can you talk to that in terms of your intentionality and why is it important?
Yeah, I think the power of three, and if there have been studies that have gone on to where people tend to remember things in threes. Believe it or not, you can remember more in threes than you can twos or fours. And it's a discipline that I've ascribed to. And, DiAnna and I work well together. She maybe remembers some of our days in the past where everything was in the power of threes here. And, but that by itself won't get you there. It's that combined with a communications construct, basically, so you can exercise it up and down the organization. And that's one of the things that I learned early in the Army also, and throughout the time that I was in the Army, where they had established communication constructs that was effective at pushing information up and getting information down to the organization. And so when I joined the corporate world, I created sort of my own kind of constructs around that, or I learned from a lot of constructs on having that formality in place so that it can be executed while you're there or not. But I think the key thing that made that effective, and you alluded to it, Dan, was really the power of three. What are the three things at every communication touch point, at every construct you're going to create that you want somebody to take out of the messages at the time? And it could be the three things that needs to be consistent where, okay, I want to make sure this is drilled enough that the organization understands it before you move on to the next three things. In fact, it's gotten to a point in my organization where folks kind of joke with me. They're waiting for the third thing. I start with first, second. It's okay, Mike, where's your third one? Okay. Or sometimes I'll get accused of forcing things into threes, basically. And so at least, but they're getting it. I mean, so they got three in their minds. Like, what are the three things I want to take from that? And so I think really, for me personally, is that, learning in the military, the importance of communications up and down and finding a way for it to resonate and be able to retain. The power of three is something I learned in a leadership course a long time ago that I've continued to apply to this day, and I think it's effective.
Yeah, great tip. And my wife tells me all the time, even in design, like the mantle should be three things in the mantle, no more, no less. That's just the right balance. So it's all comes back to three. I want to give a shout out. As you all know, my son Kelly was a Army Ranger like JC, and has had a great experience there. He always would talk about the AAR, like after every mission, after every training exercise, they would do the AAR. And I always thought, why don't we do that in the corporate world? And so, Woody, I want to have you take that. Tell us what the AAR is, but also, Woody, you've got a son, you've got a lot of field members who are active right now. So, I mean, we are being served very well by the Groton, the family there.
Yeah, no, thank you for that, and thanks, for your son and his distinguished service as well. I never had the honor of serving in the Ranger Regiment, but it's something that I had friends from college that did, and it just epitomizes excellence, in the military. I had the honor of pinning my son's Ranger tab last spring, and as the father of a second generation Ranger, it was an extremely proud moment for me during the graduation. Really near the beginning of it, to say all personnel in the audience who have a son or daughter graduating today, please stand. And it just gave me chills to think about, what he had been through, and knowing, for myself. I posted some pictures of that, of me pinning his tab on LinkedIn, had over 100,000 views. So I think that kind of story, that kind of resonates with people. So the AAR is the after action review, and it is just part and parcel to everything you do in the military. It's where you review whether it's a project, a ceremony, an incident, a training event, combat, whatever, to document what went right and what you can improve on. And as DiAnna mentioned before, the Army, we're going to let you fail. It's going to happen, and you're going to learn from that. I'll say that in my experience in the military, AARs can be brutal. Like, we did this, we screwed this up, we did that, we did the other. Oh yeah, we did this one thing right. Let's sustain that. In my civilian experience, I've seen that some organizations are hesitant to discuss what went wrong because they don't want to look bad. But that's not what it's about. It's about having the ability and leadership that will tolerate those mistakes and learn from them. We have to, if someone makes an honest mistake, it's going to happen, and just don't repeat it and learn from it and do better. And that really makes you a learning organization. That's something I asked the CEO when I was coming to Draper. I'm like, is Draper a learning organization? Because to me, a learning organization is a great organization.
Yeah. Well said. DiAnna, the AAR, is that you're big on every soldier is a leader, right? You expect everyone in your organization to be a leader. Does the AAR, is that one of the tools that equips to build the muscle for that kind of thing to take place, for that to be executed?
Yeah, I think it definitely did in the military. I think what Woody was explaining, how sometimes I've seen it play out on the civilian world, it can have the opposite of that. I think candidly, leadership is just having the confidence to have a plan and then influence people to follow that, right? Because Mike was right. Yeah, you can direct even in no matter how high up in the organization, you can say, do this. And if people don't believe it, they do the bare minimum. So that confidence then is really, really important, especially with young leaders who haven't a lot of experience. They just have instinct. And I think sometimes the AARs in the military were really reassuring because they saw, these powerful NCOs, these first sergeants, these platoon sergeants out there admitting, hey, we should have done that better, and next time I'll do this. And that modeling that, hey, it's okay, maybe, and he's still respected. He's actually respected more. So I think in the military, it definitely does. In the civilian world, if it's not executed well, it strips and it takes people's confidence away. And so you have fewer leaders and you just have a lot of followers. So one of the things about kind of ingraining into the civilian workforce is, in the best way possible, that same mindset that, hey, let's talk about, what happened here, and let's not point blame. Let's not use names. Let's use things. So what problem surfaced, which teams could have solved it? What was in the way? How were those blockers tackled? And that kind of language, Dan, is hard to learn because initially, you don't have that skill set. You're sort of like, well, Mike was at fault. Well, Woody should have done this. And then as a leader, you've got to say, hold on, let's back up. Yeah, maybe. But, let's talk about why. What were the things that got in their way that made that happen? So I think if you can't create that, it's really hard to then allow people the chance to ever take that first leadership role. They're terrified of it. But once you've created that environment where, hey, first failure isn't the end of your career, then I think you can build in that culture where people then start to take really good risks. They really start to talk more, they communicate. And that ties back to that whole piece about no good plan ever is executed perfectly. When those things happen, you build in that culture where there's a really strong set of reactions and trust, and people lean on each other. So yeah, I wish we did more of it, but I sure think in the military, it gave all of us a really good set of strong shoulders to sort of absorb some criticism and move on.
Yeah, yeah. As you were talking, DiAnna, as you all have been sharing, I've been thinking back at a number of the podcast conversations I've been having with, again, all the best leaders, and the idea of leading with heart, HEART, just resonates. And heart being an acronym, I've been finding it's resonating, these attributes. And heart stands for humility, empathy, adaptability, resiliency, transparency. You've talked about all these today incredibly, and that transparency you just talked about, DiAnna, I think it really builds resiliency, builds confidence, right, in terms of our people. And I don't think we spend enough time on that, thinking about that, the importance of that today. So I appreciate your perspective. And I've been looking forward to get, this next question. Woody, I'm going to have you speak on behalf of the group here, but we have a real passion for doing tech for good, right? The four of us do, my team. And, as a company, we're donating $125,000 in scholarships to our TechLX leadership program, 9-month cohort-based program. And Woody and Mike, you've had several people in it. You both mentor in the program. Thank you very much. DiAnna, we definitely want to get you plugged in as a mentor because you're amazing. But Woody, we as a group here today have the ability to gift a seat in that program to one of your favorite nonprofits, STEM related, and I'd love it for it to be veteran related. So what do the three of you come up with?
Yeah, so we decided on the Student Veterans of America, SVA. It's the premier organization leading service research programs and advocacy for veterans in higher education. Their vision is to empower student veterans to lead and live their best lives. Their mission is to act as a catalyst for student veteran success by providing resources, network support, and advocacy to, through, and beyond higher education. So through a network of more than 1,500 on-campus chapters, SVA has been inspiring tomorrow's leaders since 2008 to ensure that they achieve their greatest potential. And, Draper is there in Cambridge, Massachusetts, surrounded by MIT and Harvard, two of the best schools in the country. And I've had a lot of interaction with veterans. And I think those non-traditional students have a great impact on their peer students and as well as the faculty and their professors. So, fostering veterans and supporting them through higher education. And there's a little bit of a transition too, especially, you come from the military and all of a sudden you're a little bit older and you're in a campus environment. So it's just really good to have that type of peer organization there to support you. So again, thank you so much for your support of that.
I love that. I cannot wait to get them plugged in, and we'll get them on our website too, so we can promote that organization and all their good work. And unfortunately, we're kind of at the end of our time, which really bums me out because I've got like 2 more hours of questions for you three. But good news is we're going to continue our dialogue, and I'm going to write a blog about the three of you, quoting you, really digging into your career advice, because you've got some really astute career advice on how do you climb the ladder, how do you shift. The idea of perpetual optimism is a force multiplier. I think it's one of yours, Woody. And then Mike, you've got today's high bar is tomorrow's expectations. So we're going to talk about these topics in the blog post that will come out next Thursday. And meanwhile, I just want to thank you all for sharing. Thank you for your service again. I know this is an important month for you as veterans and serving as you continue to do. So thank you for that. And as we go out here, thanks to my producer, Ryan, and the team for putting in different music, special music for this episode. So thank you all very much.